German ace made one mistake. It handed America the first jet fighter of the future. April 1945. American bomber crews thought the worst was over. Germany was burning, its cities shattered, its airfields bomb-scarred. Then, out of a clear European sky, the future appeared. No prepele. No warning. Just a silver shape slashing across the formation at over 500 miles per hour. So fast that gunners swore it was a rocket. A B-17 vanished in a flash of orange. Another spiraled down, bleeding fire. This was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. To terrified bomber crews, it wasn't just a new airplane. It was a cheat code, a machine that broke every rule they thought they understood about air combat. Nothing in the Allied inventory could catch it in level flight. Not the vaunted Mustang, not the Thunderbolt, not the Spitfire. Pilots watched the 262 carve through bomber boxes, fire a 2-second burst from its 430mm cannons, and be gone before anyone could even line up a shot. They whispered a new word over the intercom, jet. And with that word came something far more dangerous than speed, the fear that the war might suddenly flip back in Germany's favor, just when victory seemed inevitable. On paper, that fear made sense. The Me 262 was years ahead of anything flying in 1944. Its top speed could brush past 500 miles per hour. Its climb rate made piston fighters look like they were stuck in glue. Its cannons didn't just damage bombers. A single hit from a 30mm mine shell could almost cut a heavy 4-engine bomber in half. If Germany had fielded it in large numbers 2 years earlier, the skies over Europe might have looked very different. That was the nightmare playing in the back of every Allied planner's mind. What if this jet was only the beginning? What if hundreds of them started hitting bomber streams every day? But the future came with fine print. Early jet engines were temperamental, fragile, and brutally unforgiving. Push the throttle too fast, and the Junkers Jumo 004 engines inside the Me 262 could flame out or tear themselves apart. Run them hot, and they burned through their limited lifetime in a handful of sorties. German pilots were ordered to treat the engines like glass. Don't slam the power. Don't suck in debris. Don't botch the landing. Because a single mistake on takeoff or touchdown could destroy not just a rare fighter, but Germany's last, best hope to slow the Allied advance. One Luftwaffe pilot was about to prove exactly how fragile that hope really was. He was an experienced jet flyer, one of the few men trusted with the new fighter. That afternoon, he brought his Me 262 back from a mission with one engine running rough and flak holes peppering the wings. The airfield below was short, the approach tight, the runway fringed with bomb craters and debris. He lined up anyway, gear down, flaps out. The airspeed needle sat just a little too high for comfort, but he was committed. There was no fuel for another circuit. The jet touched down, bounced, and came down hard a second time. This time, the fragile right engine inhaled chunks of loose concrete and dirt from the torn-up runway. Compressor blades shattered. The Me 262 lurched sideways, skidded off the strip, plowed through the grass, and collapsed in a cloud of dust and shredded metal. The cockpit canopy blew off. The pilot, bruised and stunned, crawled out. Behind him, the world's most advanced fighter sat broken, but not destroyed. The engines were wrecked. The landing gear was gone. But the airframe, the wings, the cockpit, the systems that made the jet so terrifying, were all still there, waiting for someone with time, tools, and curiosity. He didn't know it yet, but his bad landing had just opened a crack in Germany's technological armor. A crack the Allies were about to drive a truck through. Because that crashed Me 262 was not the only one fate would spare from total destruction. And the men coming to collect those wrecks didn't care how many sorties they had flown, or how many bombers they had downed. They cared about something far more valuable than a single kill. Secrets. Secrets of engineering. Secrets of the future. The kind of secrets that could decide not just how this war ended, but how the next one would begin. Across Germany, as the Reich collapsed, Allied ground forces overran airfields that had once been off-limits and heavily guarded. At Lechfeld, at Fassberg, at scattered strips hidden in forests and villages, they found the same thing over and over again. Wrecked jets, half-assembled jets, jets with fuel tanks dry and engines still warm. Most of them were too damaged to save. But some weren't. At one captured field, a lone Me-262 appeared overhead, its pilot out of options. Fuel gone, bases lost, the war obviously over. He lowered his gear and brought the jet in to land. Not for Germany, but straight into Allied hands. The aircraft rolled to a stop, engines whining down, as heavily armed German ground crews faced American soldiers and did something no one expected. Surrendered their miracle weapon without firing a shot. Elsewhere, another Me-262, damaged by flak and running on a single engine, tried to limp home and came up short. The pilot picked a flat field, lowered the gear, and prayed. The jet slid across the grass, ripped its landing gear off, and came to rest in a cloud of dust. The pilot survived. The plane didn't explode. No fireball. No scattered fragments. Just a broken, mostly intact, top-secret fighter lying in a farm field in what was rapidly becoming Allied territory. Within days, American troops rolled through the area. A patrol spotted something strange among the wrecks and burned trucks. No propeller. Sleek swept wings. Twin nacelles slung under the wing. What the hell is that? The answer was simple and terrifying. This was the jet that had haunted Allied briefings for months. The Stormbird. The Swallow. The Me-262. They didn't blow it up. They called it in. Soon, the men who specialized in stealing the future arrived. Intelligence officers and test pilots from a unit known as Watson's Whizzers. Their job was not to fight German technology. Their job was to capture it, fly it, and strip it down to the last rivet. They walked around the crippled Me-262 like surgeons around a patient. Photos from every angle. Measurements. Serial numbers. Notes on the guns, the cockpit, the strange new engines mounted under the wings. Nothing got thrown away. Every piece, from shattered compressor blades to bent landing gear, went into crates. All of it had a one-way ticket, not to the front, but to laboratories and test centers in Britain and the United States. Farnborough, Wright Field, Freeman Field, places where captured enemy aircraft came to have their secrets extracted, piece by piece. At Lechfeld Airfield, the stakes went even higher. There, the Whizzers and other Allied teams found not just wrecks, but multiple intact Me-262s, some still flyable, guarded by ground crews with nothing left to fight for. One German pilot even landed a fully armed Me-262 and surrendered it on the spot. The sight said everything about how fast the world was changing. A man sitting in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter on Earth, hands raised, giving up without a shot. Those jets did not stay on German soil for long. Loaded onto transports and even an aircraft carrier, they were shipped to Cherbourg, then across the Atlantic, their wings removed, fuselages lashed to the decks like captured sea monsters. From there, by rail and road to Wright Field in Ohio and other American test bases, while the British flew their own captured machines into Farnborough for evaluation. Once they arrived, the future stopped being a rumor and became something Allied engineers could touch. Hangar doors closed. Guards were posted. Inside, test pilots and technicians swarmed over the Me-262s like ants on a fallen predator. They traced cables, mapped fuel lines, studied the strange axial flow jet engines that breathed air differently from anything they had ever seen. Then came the real test. Someone had to fly them. At Wright Field, American test pilots strapped into cockpits that still smelled of war. Some had never imagined they would be taking off in a German jet, with German instruments, German labels, and engines designed by men they'd been bombing for years. The ground crews lit the engines. The Jumo 004S coughed, belched smoke, then spooled up with a rising, hungry whine. The pilot eased the throttles forward like he was handling explosives. Too fast, and the engines might die or rip themselves apart. Too slow, and he'd run out of runway. The jet rolled, accelerating more slowly than its legend suggested. At low speed, it felt heavy, almost clumsy, nothing like the knife-edge agility the stories promised. Only as it climbed and the airspeed rose did the Me-262 become what it was on paper. Fast, smooth, frighteningly clean in the air. Up high, the test pilots understood why Allied crews had been so scared. The 262 could outrun anything they had. Its dive performance was superb. Its guns, when test-fired at hulks and target aircraft, showed why a single 30mm hit could destroy a bomber. But the more they flew it, the more the cracks in the legend opened. The first weakness was throttle response. At low speed, the engines lagged badly. Slam the power and the engine could surge, flame out, or even shred itself. Try to maneuver hard at low altitude, and the pilot was suddenly wrestling not just the airframe, but 2 ticking time bombs under his wings. The second weakness was vulnerability during takeoff and landing. The Me-262 needed long, smooth runways, free of debris. Its engines sat low, close to the ground, perfectly positioned to suck up rocks, shell fragments, or chunks of broken concrete. Exactly what littered German airfields in the last year of the war. At those moments, wheels down, flaps out, speed low, engines spooled back. The mighty jet wasn't a predator. It was a target. Reports from the front matched what the tests revealed. Allied pilots found that in level flight, they could not catch the 262. But if they loitered near known jet bases, above the pattern or along the runway approaches, they could pounce on Me-262s as they took off or landed. Fighter groups began to set traps. P-51s and other escorts orbited outside flak belts, waiting for the moment a 262 committed to landing. When the jet lined up, gear down, with no room to accelerate and no engine response to save it, the Mustangs dove in, guns blazing. Many Me-262s were destroyed not in heroic high-speed duels, but in those brief, helpless seconds on final approach. The pattern was the same with ground attack. Bombers and fighter bombers focused on jet bases, cratering runways, strafing parked aircraft, and turning every takeoff into a gamble with death. In just a few months, scores of Me-262s were wrecked on the ground. The jet that no escort could catch in a chase turned out to be easiest to kill when it was slowest. Back in the test hangars, engineers and pilots wrote page after page of evaluations. They described the Me-262's strengths: its speed, its heavy armament, its stable high-speed handling, its excellent dive performance. But they also circled its flaws in red ink: unreliable engines, slow throttle response, long and vulnerable takeoff runs, and the difficulty of aiming heavy cannon at such high closing speeds. Those reports did more than explain how to kill a Me-262. They helped define what the next generation of jets should be. In Britain, at Farnborough, pilots compared the Me-262 to the Gloucester Meteor. The German jet was faster and more refined at high speed, but the Meteor was more forgiving and far more reliable. The lesson was clear. In a long war, the machine that flies every day beats the miracle that spends most of its life in the hangar. In the United States, engineers working on the P-80 Shooting Star and later projects pored over Me-262 data. They studied its swept wing and clean fuselage, its engine placement and high-speed behavior, and they also took note of everything that went wrong: short engine life, sensitivity to throttle, and dangerous low-speed handling. Captured Me-262s flew over American and British test ranges for years after the war. They dove toward transonic speeds, helping researchers understand compressibility and shock waves. They fired their cannons into obsolete bombers, demonstrating just how devastating heavy automatic weapons could be against large aircraft. Every flight, every engine failure, every hair-raising landing by a test pilot added one more line to an unwritten textbook on jet combat. A textbook the Allies would use and Germany never would. By the time the Korean War arrived, that textbook had turned into reality. F-86 Sabres and MiG-15s dueled in the skies at speeds the Me-262 could only dream of. Their designers had moved far beyond the German jet. But many of the questions they had asked and answered came straight from those captured machines in Ohio and England. The Me-262 had not saved Germany. It was too late, too few, too fragile. But in failure, it did something astonishing. It handed its enemies the keys to the jet age. Historians today estimate that around 1,400 Me-262s were built, but only a fraction ever became operational, and even fewer flew regularly. Pilots claimed hundreds of kills, mostly against bombers and unescorted targets, yet the jet never appeared in the swarms its designers imagined. Allied aircraft, by contrast, destroyed dozens of Me-262s in the air and many more on the ground, especially in the last chaotic months of the war. For every terrifying pass through a bomber formation, there was a 262 left burning on a runway, its promise swallowed by dust and debris. German veterans later called the Me-262 a wasted miracle. Too late, too little, starved of fuel and parts, flown by undertrained pilots on suicidal missions. Allied historians used different words. To them, those captured jets, the wrecks in fields, the surrendered machines at Lechfeld, the aircraft towed into hangars at Wright Field and Farnborough, were something else entirely, a technological jackpot. One bad landing on a cratered strip. One forced wheels down slide into a farm field. One pilot choosing surrender over a last pointless fight. That was all it took. Germany spent years racing to invent the future of air combat. The United States and Britain spent months taking that future apart, understanding it, and then building something better. That is how a handful of mistakes, a bounced landing, an engine failure, a surrender at the end of the runway, turned the world's first jet fighter from Hitler's last hope into the Allies' blueprint for the next era of war in the sky. One crash, one aircraft, one intelligence coup that helped make sure that in the wars to come, it would be Allied pilots, not the pilots of the Third Reich, who owned the fast lane of the sky.